it's your man Brett from the Skateboarding Show here with a think piece and part 2 of the 3-part series on is skateboarding a sport or an art, which I do acknowledge is a leading question, but we'll come to that in part 3. This is part 2. So in part 1, so this is a 3-part series, like I say. Part 1, I defined what sport is. In this episode, part 2, I'm going to define what art is. And then in part 3, using those two definitions, we're going to see where skateboarding fits into those two definitions, which might answer the question. It might not. Who knows? Who knows what we come to? So this is part 2. What is art? So art is an interpretation of a subject matter. Now that subject matter, and again, I'm looking, if you're watching the video, I'm looking down here because I've actually made some notes. If you're just listening, then you won't see that I'm looking, but because remember, this is available both as an audio podcast for you to listen to when you're doing stuff and on visual media as well. Anyway, right, so art is an interpretation of a subject matter. Now, that subject matter might be a physical thing, something in the environment, but it can also be a conceptual thing. It might be, or a feeling thing, or an emotion thing, and we'll come to that in a bit. But you might be interpreting something less physical, or maybe not even physical, depending on how you look at it and how you interpret these things, and how you decode these things. But that is art might involve a creative process. It might involve expression. It might involve all manner of things, but all those things are employed, or my take on it is that all those things are employed to help interpret a subject matter. And as I say, that subject matter might be a bowl of fruit, or it might be the feeling of happiness. The subject matter might be our relationship to space within the consumer environment, or it could be a landscape that you're looking out on. So it could be something conceptual. It could be something that the artist says, in this piece of work, I'm exploring the way in which we deal with sadness. Right? That's a conceptual thing. That's like something that needs to be explained to you. Or it could be that the artist is going, oh no, this is a picture of a nice tree that I like, that I've painted. It's just an observational painting that I've made. And there's no, one is not better or worse than the other, but they're very different in terms of what the subject matter, what's being interpreted. One is something physical in the environment, one is a conceptual idea, right? So art usually involves an artist. It usually involves the tools of the art, which again we'll come back to in a minute. It always has a subject matter, and it always has an artistic outcome. Okay, there's always something created by it. Okay, an artistic outcome. That could be a piece of drama. It could be a painting. It could be a piece of music. It could be the performing of that piece of music. And again, I think I might be touching on that in a minute. So there are elements that are pretty much almost sort of required, if you will, especially a subject matter and an artistic outcome. By its very nature, art being relatively humanistic, being human requires a human to do it. So there's usually an artist involved. Even if it's created by a robot, some human has programmed that robot or made the robot. So there's a human involved. And yes, actually, art does require a tool. But these are the things that are required for art. This is not what art is. Art, all those things are required to then interpret the subject matter. Okay, so art can be expressive, it can be intellectual, it can be conceptual, it can deal with ideas, it can help to exercise our emotions, it can help to give us something to feel something about, right? That's not necessarily entirely what it is, but it's pretty critical, actually. It's pretty yeah, it's up there. It's up there with it's pretty close to being an overarching element of art, that it's because it feeds into this interpreting thing. Through interpreting a subject matter, there is feelings and emotions and thoughts involved. Okay, and thoughts. But irrespective of, you know, so art can be expressive and it can deal with intellectual and, excuse me, it can deal with conceptual ideas, but that is not, those elements of art are not the overarching elements that make art art. The thing that makes art, other things can be expressive. Simply saying that you feel angry is expressive. As an example, talking about the relationship of space within a consumer environment as an idea, as a just to pluck out the air example, that's a discussion. What would make art art? The overarching element is that there's some sort of interpretation of that, and then an artistic outcome is created. So yeah, perhaps I think I might need to add that as well. Through interpreting the subject matter, a artistic outcome is created. Now, so for example, music interprets notes, sounds, audible content. On a basic level, let's call them notes. We can call them notes. It interprets the connection between those notes, the relationship between those notes. Notes, possibly, and feelings and emotions, because music can really bring about feelings and emotions in a way that some other art forms don't do as directly as music does. Although most of them do in some way or another, but music has some sort of quality about it that makes it a very direct connection to interpreting of feelings and bringing about feelings and emotions. But music interprets notes. And then the artistic outcome is the piece of music. So painting itself interprets maybe a subject matter, a bowl of fruit, a landscape, or whatever it may be. But perhaps also it interprets colours, and again the relationship between colours, tone, light, texture, and the relationship between those things. That's part of what's being interpreted with painting. Drama and acting interprets the human experience as part of its subject matter. Sculpture interprets materials, physical, 3D tools and uses. Sculpture interprets the subject matter using 3D materials. Okay. Art is complete in and of itself. It does not exist to find out which artist is better than which other artist, because each person's interpretation is valid. Each person's interpretation of their subject matter is in and of itself completely valid and does not require ranking or ordering compared to anyone else's. So So there are things that are required for art: an artist, tools for the art, notes, paint, colour, light. There's subject matter that is required to interpret, and then there's artistic outcomes that are created. Those are the things that are required, but they're still not quite what art is. What art is that critical bit of interpreting a subject matter. Okay, art might be expressive, it might be creative, it might be intellectualized, it might be many, many different things. But the ultimate thing that makes art art is that it interprets a subject matter. So, next part in this series, so we've defined sport, we've just defined art, and in the next part, we're going to see if we can take what we think skateboarding is and see where it fits in to either one of those two definitions and see what we come up with. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'll speak to you all soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.